Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of appropriate ages, get ready for the AZA Commander Podcast.
Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to the AZA Commander Podcast, where we talk about Magic the Gathering Commander format. My name is a Zombie Apocalypse. You can find gameplay videos of Magic the Gathering and other games on Twitch and YouTube.
Hello again, my friends. My name is CheddarX, but I also respond to Tim since that's what my mama named me. I occasionally stream MTG and Arena on Twitch. You can also find me playing Commander with my friend Zombie and some other randos on his Twitch stream.
Before we get started today, we want to remind you the best way to support the podcast is to follow us on your favorite podcast listening apps and watch this video and other videos on YouTube and tune into our streams on Twitch. Links will be in the description below. So what are we talking about today?
Today, we are talking about threat assessment in the Commander format. How do we make the best possible decisions with so many things going on at the Commander table? We will answer some hard-hitting questions about multiplayer dynamics, must-answer threats, and how to manage your own threat level. But before we do that, we have to take a serious tone for just a second with a public service announcement.
The views expressed in the AZA Commander Podcast are just the opinions of two overly enthusiastic Magic the Gathering players. Threat assessment is not an exact science, so just because you find something threatening does not mean it is threatening to someone else. Keep in mind that there are many different situations and playstyles that can influence how someone interprets threats. You may not agree with the information shared in the podcast, and if that is the case, please do not threaten us in the comments.
So we're going to start out today by asking the question, what do we mean by threat assessment? It's pretty common language in the Magic the Gathering community, in the Commander world, but the term actually finds its origins in a very, very different space. And we're actually going to use that to contextualize our conversation at least a little bit today. So from ScienceDirect.com, in an article about kind of governmental and security system threat assessment, this is the definition that they give. So a threat assessment is an evaluation of events that can adversely affect operations or specific assets. So again, there it is taking a look at outside things that can have a negative impact on our operations or our assets. And so, again, putting that into the context of the Commander world, it is what are the things going on in the game that can have a negative impact on our game plan, on what we are doing, our operations and assets. So I'm gonna, have Zombie join the conversation now and ask, when you think of threat assessment, what comes to mind for you? How would you describe it if someone were to ask you what is threat assessment?
So the main thing for threat assessment is what is stopping me from winning the game, or what's going to cause someone else to win the game. Those are the main things that I look for when I'm looking for threat assessment. And it's just that's really what it is. Like, what's stopping me from doing what I need to do, or what's causing someone else to win. Those are the main threat assessment things.
I like that description a lot because it really gets to the quick of it, right? It's a very, very direct way of describing it, but it also makes this really important point is that, I'm going to look at how those things are impacting my game plan. Like, what are the things that are going to stop me from winning? But Magic is so complicated and there are so many different things going on is in the game itself, but then to a bigger extent, especially when we play it in a multiplayer format, there's so many different things going on at any one time. It makes it extra difficult to really answer that question. What is the one thing that's going on right now that is most likely to cause somebody else to win or to cause me to lose, or both? As we know that oftentimes those things can happen at the same time.
But just because something is stopping you from winning doesn't mean it's stopping other people from winning either. So a threat to me in my door deck is going to be something different than your Saheeli deck or your what's his name, the Rakdos guy.
Oh, Mishra, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's a great point. Or even like, so if I'm playing Saheeli, the Gifted, I'm playing all artifacts. So Vandal Blast is a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm playing Sithis, I'm playing all enchantments. I don't care. I don't even have a Soul Ring in that deck. I don't care about Vandal Blast at
Who
all.
needs a soul ring, right?
Hmm.
So those are the ideas of threat assessment. And really, how do you prioritize different kinds of threats? Then.
So in this part of the conversation, we're going to talk about the different kinds of threats, kind of kind of lumping them all into bigger categories together, and then figuring out how in a particular game, or we're going to figure out what's the biggest threat. And we just already talked about just now how if someone is playing something that nerfs artifacts or negatively impacts artifacts in particular, that's only going to affect a deck that is relying on artifacts. Other people aren't going to have that as well. So, but the first item on our list is big and scary creatures. So if somebody drops a dark steel colossus, a giant 11/11 indestructible trample creature, do I have something that is going to allow me to deal with that or not? Because again, in Commander, that's not the fastest possible clock, but that thing's still going to kill me in 4 swings. So, is that something that's going to be a big threat for me? It depends on the type of deck I'm playing. If I don't have defense against that kind of thing, I might perceive that as a pretty significant threat. So I might prioritize that. So, what other different kinds of threats?
Well, so actually, honestly, I was going to add on to the biggest and scariest creatures. That's kind of
Hmm.
like the easiest thing to see, right? Like when it comes to the whole threat assessment argument, uh, seeing a big, dumb, scary creature is really easy. It's right there in the middle of the board, where some of the other threat assessment things that we'll be talking about in just a moment are kind of like more subtle and
That's
less
a
out there.
It's such a great point because the other thing that we have to think about when we're asking this question is what are the different ways you can lose? And the most direct way, way that most games are won, is by reducing somebody's life total to zero. And what is the most common way that you're going to do that? And it is big and scary creatures. So yes, very, very plain as day, a giant board threatening creature is going to, I mean, let's talk about Yargle and Multani,
Woo,
right?
baby.
Like probably a better current example
Yeah.
than
I
Darksteel
mean, he's the
Colossus.
18-6. That's all he
Right,
is.
right.
But
So that
that's
guy with that guy with a single piece of equipment is going to kill you in
in one
two
shot. Yeah.
swings, one shot if it's your commander.
Right, right.
So, but if we're just looking at traditional combat damage as a way to die, it is absolutely the most common way people still kill people. I definitely see it more often than anything
Mm-hmm.
else. And big and scary creatures are the clearest representation of that. So you're right. As far as threat assessment, those are the easy to identify
Or
ones.
even just like a whole bunch of tiny creatures too, because like whether you're getting hit by a 40/40 or 41/1s, it doesn't matter. You're dead.
That's
So
right.
so it's easy to see a whole bunch of creatures, or it's easy to see like one huge creature. But like one of the harder things that is when someone's building an engine, where they're getting just like I like to call it Value Town, like all aboard, choo choo, we're in Value Town, baby. That's where you're drawing a whole, like, not a whole bunch at once, but like, it's like you do one thing and three things triggers. You do another thing, two more things trigger. I'm drawing cards to replace the cards that I'm playing. Like when my creatures die, I'm getting extra benefits from it. So like when you see someone, realistically, it's like when someone starts taking really long turns, that's when something's being a little bit scary, and you should consider that as being a threat.
I like that as a kind of marker for it, right? If you want to know if somebody's engine is really running, how long are the turns that they're taking?
Mm-hmm.
And I think an example of this for me is, and this is not just true about me, anybody who builds this kind of deck, is if somebody has a Super Friends deck
Mm-hmm.
and they get a lot of planeswalkers out, and I'll come back to planeswalkers as a different problem in a minute, but they end up taking really long turns, and the reason for that is they're getting a lot of incremental value out of each of those things, and they have to make all those different decisions, and and the length of somebody's turn as an indicator that their engine is online is a very good point.
And it's like it's not just like doing the actions are taking along. Because like if you have like a Cathar's Crusade or something where you're every time you play a creature you get a whole bunch of 1/1s, just moving all those dice by one every time is going to take time. What I mean by taking time is when they have to sit and think, okay, like, all right, if I do this, this, and this is going to happen. Like, and like there'll be breaks. So, like something will happen, and there'll be thought. Something will happen, and then there'll be even more thought.
Interesting.
That's the engine that I'm more referring to. Because like if you're just doing a lot of game actions, like if you play three things, that's not necessarily an engine. You're just playing three things that might have separate effects that take time to actually resolve.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'll go ahead.
Another item that you had added to the list when we talked about that we brought up this topic is somebody drawing a lot of cards. And I think that this is a really important thing for us to talk about, mostly because this one, I think, at least in my experience, doesn't draw the same amount of attention that I feel like it should.
It's, it's
That I
really
think
subtle.
yeah, it feels like it shouldn't be because we even you and I who are like the dinosaurs of the game at this point, like because of how long we've been playing, we have been taught since we were children that card advantage wins games. That drawing cards is the most important thing, which is not honestly, strictly speaking, true, but it's a good basis for if you're drawing more cards than everybody else, you have more options. Chances are you're in an advantaged position. But it's remarkable how when somebody if they're good about it and not like really kind of braggartly about it, if they're not like making a big deal about it, drawing a bunch of cards can be a very it doesn't draw the hate I think it should.
My card deck is very good at doing that.
It's terrific at that, and like I'm just gonna brain geyser for 10 on your end step, and then untap and take my turn. Everybody goes, yeah, okay,
Sounds good.
fine. He's got
Sounds good.
17 cards in his hand.
Yeah, and it turns out when you have like it's just the huge card selection that you have just opens up the floodgates. And what that also does is let's say you're trying to now start answering the threats that they're playing because they drew these cards. They're going to have responses to your responses because they just have the cards now. And like
That's right.
it's easier to answer something when they don't have cards in the hand versus when they have like you don't know if they have 26 counter spells in their deck or not. So like
Right.
it's just like when I draw 12 cards or 13 cards with Garth and then someone tries to mess with me, I'll be like, I have a response for that.
Right. And I think that like that draws back to the quote that we started with, right? That we have to look at this as what are the things that are going to affect my operations or assets? And we also have to consider how what our opponents are doing are affecting their operations or assets. So like as you said, the building of their engine, getting that online is their operations, right? Like their system is functioning the way that it's supposed to. That is good for them and therefore bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the asset thing really comes to mind, and that's going to come up a lot today. That there is, I think, this disconnect that we have with playing the game where we forget that it is absolutely a resource based game and that we don't pay attention to all of the resources that our opponents are getting, and when we do that we end up putting ourselves in really nasty spots.
So the next part of threat assessment, it does require a little bit of game knowledge. But combo pieces, knowing what cards are combo pieces or could potentially lead to other combos is something that like we were playing a game the other night and the guy's like, "Oh, I'm going to search for rooftop storm." I'm like, "Oh no, this is a problem." And then he just happened to like land on the perfect turn where it's like I had to tap out or I wasn't doing anything. And I
Mm-hmm.
had the answer in my hand, but he just happened to swoop in and just choose the right time to do it. And he ended up winning with an infinite combo where he just like pings us to death because dungeons are crazy. But anyway, So
Dungeons are bad, but that specific
yeah,
combo
it worked really
just
well.
it does a whole bunch of things infinitely, and that's the only thing that makes them good. But I think it's very important for you to acknowledge here that like combo pieces are a very significant threat because that's the operations and the assets thing, right? Like that is basically the assembly of the weapon that is going to end the game. And if they are allowed to assemble all of the pieces of it, they are going to win, everyone else is going to lose, maybe both at the same time. And so it does require game knowledge. There's no two ways about it. And this is something that we'll talk about more as we go on today. How do we, how important is it to have that knowledge, and how do how do you leverage that knowledge in a multiplayer game where the other people at the table might not know, hey, that thing that's happening there is almost certainly a part of this person's combo. We should pay attention to
that's the
this.
good part about like being in a multiplayer format, and you don't
Right.
necessarily have to rely on people knowing absolutely everything, because if you know it, just tell the other players like, hey, that's a scary card, maybe we should consider destroying it, because like when you get some combos online, once the combo happens, it's kind of hard to disrupt in the middle of the combo. So like knowing that this is a particular combo piece and let's get rid of it now before it's too late is solves a lot of problems for a lot of people.
Right. And I think that communication that we have with others, that back and forth that we have, that is one of the benefits of the multiplayer. How are we going to use that to kind of keep each other in check? But that can come back and bite you, right? Like if you help kind of leverage somebody into a more advantaged position on the other side of the table, then that person might actually swoop ahead as a result. Tough choice. And that's really what we're talking about today. When does it make sense to use your informational, because that's informational advantage, right? Like the thing that other people might not know, and you can use that informational advantage to kind of leverage favor in the game, but does it make sense to in that? So the last thing in this area that I want to talk about is I noted planeswalkers as the cards I want to talk about, and I think that they have a unique quality that really turns threat assessment on its head a little bit. But I also want to bring to the conversation the new card type battles, because I think that we're going to end up seeing at least something relatively similar as a result of them, especially as we see more of them in the future. So the reason I want to bring up planeswalkers is that they are obviously powerful cards that give you that incremental value, but I think for whatever reason they get an inordinate amount of attention. Like they get a lot of threat, like they are assessed very high as a threat most of the time. People see a planeswalker and they, for whatever reason, feel really incentivized to try to get that planeswalker off of the board. And I think that has to do with the very clear incremental value you get from planeswalkers. But what's remarkable to me is that people do that with planeswalkers, but they don't do it as much with artifacts and enchantments that also get an incremental value.
It's interesting how, because like I've seen games where it's either or. When you play a planeswalker and they're like, oh, okay, whatever. Or it's like, oh my god, kill that guy right now.
Okay.
I've seen both, and it's interesting how like, and it's weird because like when you see it as Super Friends deck, people seem to care less about it. I don't understand why.
It's interesting.
Like I've seen like because at that point the problem is you have so many choices. It's like, okay, well, which planeswalker do I attack? Why attack the planeswalker when I can attack the player? It makes it a little bit easier. But like, because the best kind of removal is player removal. That's an AZA Commander podcast quote, and I want you to remember that.
It's definitely the way to deal with Super Friends decks, and I think most people in the community have come to that conclusion at some point or another, that when somebody has that much incremental value on board, the best way to deal with that situation is not to itemize, but to just get rid of the person altogether.
That's my favorite kind of removal.
And what's interesting to me is that it takes up your resources. Like you're supposed to be doing combat damage to the other players, and instead you're throwing it over here at the planeswalkers because that's honestly one of the easiest ways to remove a planeswalker from the table because there isn't a lot of targeted or even mass planeswalker removal
Right.
that sees a lot of play in Commander. It just does. You don't see it very often. There are cards that do it, but boy, do they just not come up very often. So what's interesting as a threat assessment question is, how much do people prioritize doing it? And you're right. I've seen it sway back and forth. So
Both
I'd be
ways, yeah.
curious. I'd be curious to know where that is on people's threat levels. And I do think that, all those things aren't equal. There are definitely planeswalkers that when you see them, it's like, oh no, we actually do have to deal with that now because Narset, Parter of Veils immediately comes to
Oko.
mind. You know,
Oko. Oko. I'm tired of turning my stuff
let
into Elks.
listen. I'm gonna like. I think that Oko is a solid example of a planeswalker that really draws a lot of hate. And having as someone who has played that in Commander, I can really tell you it really does. I'm not convinced that it deserves the inordinate amount of hate that it gets. Yes, it can really like knock out commanders in a really meaningful and offensive way. Totally true.
I would say depending on how important your commander is to your game plan determines how big of a threat Oko is. Because like if your commander is there basically for the colors, it doesn't matter because
Right.
but
It becomes a lot less scary. And we all know how busted of a planeswalker is. But you're right. You and I have often talked about how we're the type of commander players where the commander matters. Like we don't build commander, we don't choose commanders just for the color combination. We're building around the commander because that's the type of deck builders we are. So Oko is the bane of our existence, but Narset shuts down extra card draw for everybody
kills
but the
her
player who's
with
playing
fire.
it. And like that one is one that really comes up. So side, really small asterisk here on battles. We don't really know exactly how this is going to change it, and the person who casts the battle is the person who benefits from it being removed from the board with combat damage. So we don't really know what this is going to look like yet. I haven't even played in a commander game where I've seen a battle yet,
Right.
so we'll find out as it. But I'm very interested to see what happens as we see more of those in the format, generally speaking, because we've really only gotten one type of battle so far. We know generically what they're going to look like, but I really do think that we're going to see very, very different ones in the future. So I'm curious to see how they play out moving forward. So moving on now, we're going to talk about, I think, one of the most interesting parts of this conversation, which is multiplayer dynamics and how do those things influence your interaction. So I'm going to let you start this part out here. So Zombie, what do you think? How do multiplayer dynamics influence the game for you?
So, for me, I think it influences a lot more than it would in a lot of like a lot of other people because like what's a threat to me doesn't necessarily mean it's a threat to you. So, having that like background game knowledge is very helpful, but like I also look at different aspects like different levels of threat, right? So, is it a threat to me? Is it a threat to the whole table? Or is it like this is a game ending threat, like we need to remove it now? Um, and if it's a threat to me specifically, I won't necessarily say, hey, that's a threat because but if it's not a threat to them, why would they remove my problem for me? But like if it's a game ending threat or it's a huge threat to the whole entire table, I might say, hey, this is a threat. We should work together to kind of get rid of that card. So looking at it in a multiplayer aspect of things, it definitely leads to some pretty decent politicking, in my opinion. Um, and it uh then you also have like the threats that are like is it game ending or is this just smoke and mirrors to kind of like slip under something else that's even worse, you know what I mean? So what are your thoughts on the multiplayer aspect of things?
So the thing that immediately comes to mind for me is the kind of politicking. Like when we talk about the multiplayer dynamic, that is the question. How are we communicating with the other people at the table? Like, are we actually kind of making deals, making alliances in the game? A lot of that stuff can be really playful and just be the social aspect of the game. Sometimes it gets into territory where it does actually become agreements where we say, hey, if we work together to do this thing, I'm not going to attack you next turn, or I'll leave your thing alone. And really, I start to think about, am I going to help other people deal with the threat, as you said? So let's use a recent example that I can think of, right, where we're playing and somebody plays Authority of the consoles, and that taps every creature that enters the battlefield. I'm playing a creature-based deck that depends on hasty creatures, so that shuts me right down. You're playing a deck that wins with a combo that doesn't care about creatures entering tap at all, not really a threat for you. I'm incentivized to remove that thing, but you, the person who actually has an answer to it in your command zone, you're not incentivized at all.
Right.
So do I, at that point, petition you and say, hey, if you can help me deal with this, I will, I'll do something for you. But what leverage do I have? That's the tough thing. If I'm already kind of on my back foot, because this thing has shut me down. On the other side, you as the player who does have the advantage in that situation, seeing that the other person is locked down, do you help them? And that's kind of, and it didn't play out that way in that game, but there was a lot going on there. I mean, I wasn't
Well,
really
we were mentally tapped out that game too.
it was not a good game.
It was super late. Like we didn't get much sleep the night before. It was just a whole fiasco to begin with. But no, you bring up a lot of interesting points where and it depends it depends on like sometimes helping, like I probably would have helped you because well, I don't know, because in that particular game everyone had to pay 5 to attack me, so it's like helping you doesn't really do anything for me. Like the only thing that I could maybe have asked you to do is remove something that I might not have been able to remove, but it also turns out I have removal in my command zone too. So
Right.
like maybe I probably wouldn't help you, but it also was slowing me down enough that it was causing me a bit of an issue. But like all these things depends on what's going on in the game, and there's no right or wrong answer to any
I
of
think
this.
I think though, and we know each other well enough to kind of, touch base on this part of this conversation. How does the way that you want other people to experience the game, and we refer to the feel bads often, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when somebody has an interaction happen and it just really puts them in a disadvantaged position, and now the game's not fun for them to play anymore. Nobody likes seeing that. And I'll use the example of, if we're playing the 4-player commander game and somebody is not playing a land, and they're missing land drops and they're falling behind, everybody else at the table looks at that person empathetically and goes, we don't want you to have to suffer that way. That is not a fun way to
I
play.
feel your pain, brother.
We feel your pain, and really, like, it's instinctive, I think, how much people will leave that player alone until they get caught up. And if you remember one of the
Ooh.
games we played at MagicCon Philly, that will help
Ooh.
player
Yeah.
came back and won.
Yep.
Because we all left him alone
Mm.
for a lot, and
Just a little too long.
that game was like the definitive, over the top. Everybody's engines were going. That was the starfighter battle at
That
the end
oh,
of the Star Wars movie.
I was thinking like T-Rex with laser beams and jetpacks kind of thing, like
Well,
everything, like it
but
was
so
just
much grander
insanity.
scale than that. Yeah, everybody's doing really extreme things, but that person who got left alone at the beginning because of that disadvantage, because we didn't want that person to feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
So we left them alone and they came back. So what the point I was getting to is that you, as a person, you want the other players to have fun.
Right. So actually,
And
when
and
I saw this note, I actually had a different thought of this. Uh, the way I thought it was going to go in a different direction. My thought was is like, okay, someone plays a turn one Soul Ring, right? and I happen to have a Vandal Blast in my hand. Do I Vandal Blast that Soul Ring to bring him back to our level? But he was relying on that Soul Ring to have like any sort of like kind of play at all.
How do you know?
But that's what I.
How do you know that that person was depending on that soul ring to balance out their bad hand?
I think depending was a bad word, but I meant just like they obviously wanted that Soul Ring, right?
Well, of course.
But like, do I Vandal Blast it on turn one, even though they might get salty and do things like that, or like, are they gonna now have a bad time because they didn't get what they want? You see, like it brings an
Right,
interesting
but
point.
that opens up like that's a philosophical question right there.
That's a whole
Like
episode in itself.
that is a quite yeah, it's almost an episode in and of itself. Yes, and really like I think that these are related conversations, right? So kind of coming back to who are you as a player? Like how is that going to influence your decision making? Because it absolutely does, especially in the game of Commander, especially where we're trying to keep a casual feeling to what we are doing and trying to have an experience where people are going to want to play again. It affects our deck building choices. It definitely affects our play interaction choices, because just the fact that you have had to stop and think about whether or not you would do that based entirely on whether it's going to cause that person to have a bad time. Because really, you're not asking yourself, is this the correct strategic
The
move?
short answer to that question is yes.
Well, I think that it is, but I think that like that is the shortest possible version of that.
Right.
That's the shortest possible answer, because it's more complex than that. Because Vandal Blast is powerful enough where you might want to say to yourself, maybe I wait a couple of turns and see how many people I can rip up with this,
Oh,
so I
okay,
can do
Nature's Claim then. One green,
okay.
gain 4 life.
Okay, that changes it entirely, right? So, do I nature's claim the person's soul ring? And I think from a strategic standpoint, the answer is almost certainly yes. Because we know that soul ring on turn one statistically puts that person at an extraordinary advantage. That we all to such a degree that most of us commander players agree that soul ring is kind of busted. That it really who if you get soul ring on turn one, you are the threat at the table. Like you are probably the person who's moving the fastest at that point. So yes, strategically the answer is you destroy it, but you are hinging your decision on whether you want to cause a bad feeling for that person. And you can do the flip here. How would you feel if you played a soul ring on one and somebody else destroyed it with their first action?
I mean, personally, I would be like, yeah, you're right.
You would say that makes sense because you
Yeah.
know that strategically that it makes sense to make that play. So we do though take into account, is somebody going to get salty about this play? And that's the challenge that we run into. And you and I play a lot over spelltable. We play a lot in the virtual format. And in the virtual format, there is at least a little bit of a layer of anonymity, a little bit of a layer of people not really knowing who you are. So there's less social dynamics in play there where they're not going to get the same consequences if they act like a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that's something that keeps most people in check. If you go play, like I mean, whenever I get to go to the LGS and play in paper on person, people are just like a blast to be around. They're so nice and so fun.
It was definitely fresh, breath of fresh air going to MagicCon Philly and just like having that in person interaction. It was kind of
Right.
nice. Yeah.
So, and it just goes to show how different it is. But this is something that is definitely going to come up when we talk about the multiplayer dynamics. One of those things is going to be, how are people's moods going to be affected by whatever happens? And the kind of trump card here to prove the point is, why don't people play Armageddon?
Right.
We don't play Armageddon because most people agree that that creates such an unfun game state that if you were to play that, people would not want to play with you any longer because it's just, or that's, it's just not a fun game state. And again, most of us just have accepted that as a reality of the game, that that is something that we do not want to play against. So how other people feel definitely comes into consideration. Like, I don't want to keep blowing up the same person's stuff over and over if it's going to continue, if it's going to cause those extraordinary.
All right.
I'm going to think twice about it.
Well, that actually is a perfect segue into our next section, where is when the threat is dealt with, how does that change your approach towards that player? So let's say a player plays like the big scary creature, only has 2 cards left in hand, and you kill that big scary creature. Is that player still the threat?
I think that there's something kind of embedded in the wording of this question that's really valuable, where you're perceiving the player as the threat instead of the card.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that is the case. That is something that factors into our decision making at some point, where we are looking at the individual and not necessarily the player, but maybe the deck. Like, what is the potential threat that deck's going to bring to the table? How does that factor into it? But yeah, based on the state that you're describing, if I'm playing against a player and the big scary creature that they had on board is now gone and they've only got 2 cards left in hand, I'm doing a resource assessment and I'm going, this person doesn't have a lot of resources right now. That is not where my attention should be.
Right, because a lot of the things that I tend to run into is they say that player is the threat instead of these things are the threats. Now, that player that they're usually talking about is usually me.
You are threatening.
I know. It's the bear look that I got going on. That's really what it is.
It's the beard.
It's the beard. It's very threatening, especially when I put the Viking beads in there. It's
Yeah. Oh man.
terrifying.
Children run across the street and
Just
yeah.
terror everywhere. But no, there's been games where I've had where it's like I'm down to 0 cards in my hand and like I cast my commander, they'll kill it. They'll destroy some other things that I might have on the board, and then they'll kill some other things. But I'm like, do you not see that they're building this crazy engine over here? Or do you not see that this person's getting out of hand over here? I've been thoroughly dealt with. There's jazz hands. Yeah. Like it's a very interesting thing to bring up. And it's like, what's like, is there a way that you can bring this to the attention of the people that are like hounding you down, even though that there's other things going on?
I feel like it might be possible here, and this isn't a slight against you, but rather a way that human dynamics often work, is that you're protesting. You're like coming out and being like, "Hey, I'm not a threat anymore. You don't have to keep doing this." Is really probably having the opposite effect that you want it to.
Oh, of course.
Where it's really like, the kind of louder somebody is when you're kind of beating the heck out of them, the more you're like, oh, I'm doing the correct thing. I like the fact that I am continuing to point my weaponry in this direction is clearly correct because I'm getting this response out of this person. So I don't know if that's the case, but it is something to consider. But it is also kind of the psychology of people. And in your case, with the decks that you traditionally play, you didn't just have the big scary creature on board. Like,
No.
you were one step away from a game-ending combo. So when somebody's trying to dismantle your engine, they really want to make sure that they've burned you to ash before they move on to the next person, when you're probably right that they probably should have moved on to somebody else a little bit sooner to keep the other players in check. But isn't that the whole name of the game, right? That's what we're talking about today, is like, when is the right time to stop managing this threat and to move on to the next one?
Right. So that was I was just about to say, okay, well, it's like, how far down do you have to burn someone before they're no longer the threat, or what they're doing is no longer the threat? Like, how many engine pieces do you have to get rid of? Do you only have to get rid of the biggest engine piece and like kind of let them rebuild and then start looking somewhere else? Or do you have to burn that bitch to the ground so far that they're so far past the Stone Age, they don't even know what rocks are anymore?
I think that like what's happening here is it at some point isn't strategic anymore. It kind of becomes personal because as you said, it happens a lot where people are associating the threat with the player and not the actual board state. So they see that you got real close to winning. They see the power level of your deck, and they are kind of perceiving you as this incredibly, as this like that even the potential of what you could possibly draw into or could possibly rebuild is greater than what's actually going on, and that's where the threat assessment is incorrect, right? But they have just like at that point in their mind what they're really doing is they are trying to make sure that it is not possible for you to ever rebuild. I totally agree with you that at that point they should have been paying attention to me because I just won.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like they're so mixed up worrying about the first person, and that happens in a lot of games. We see it all the time where the
Right.
person who gets to the finish line first, even if they don't get across it, the person who gets to the finish line first becomes the arch enemy, even once most of their and once all of their weapons have been dismantled. They're still the arch enemy, and everybody's going for them. Meanwhile, the guy with the Wilhelm deck that we left alone for the first 5 turns
Yep.
comes back and kills all of us.
Yeah, that game is definitely a like perfect example.
Man.
It's a shame I can't have it on YouTube because it was
Right.
in person at an event.
It
Oh
was
man.
so
You know what?
memorable.
Future reference. I'm gonna bring a webcam and I'm gonna have to buy a laptop so I can record games, but I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah, when we get big and famous enough, right?
Yeah,
We'll be those
we-
guys who record casual games at Magic
we
Cons
need
when we
you
go.
to help us do that. So make
Yeah,
us famous. Share it.
That's all you got to do. Small ask, right? Just
Anyway.
Oh, so moving on, the next section is about card and game knowledge. This has already come up a couple of times in the past. How important is that to threat assessment? I'll let you kind of kick off this one again. So, what do you think when it comes to card and game knowledge? How important is it for you?
So it is very important. However, there's this Dunning-Kruger kind of effect that can happen that you think you know all the cards and all the answers, but you're just wrong. Because I've seen where someone scooped early, and then I'm like, well, why'd you do that? Because I had this particular card that stops all of this. Like, no one really thinks about constant mist or certain fogs effects or whatever. And it's just like, okay, well, yeah, you attack everyone for 5 billion, but I prevent all that combat damage. So just it can be a boon. Just because you can't think of the answer doesn't mean that there's not an answer to the problem.
Right. And I think I definitely guilty of this, and I think that it kind of depends on the different formats that you play. Some of the formats are a lot faster. Like I think as somebody who plays Arena on a fairly regular basis, I get, and I know I've talked to you about this, I get stuck in this space where it's like I just want to grind as many games as fast as I can. So I will find myself conceding super quick. Like, and I know that other people have experienced this in MTG Arena because I see other people do it when I play against them. Is that they scoop to game states where it's like you're not actually dead yet, and we're not even giving yourself a chance to get out of it. And it definitely happens in Commander where you see the thing going, you see the thing happening, and you're just like, well, this is obviously a loss for all of us. Let's just scoop it up and move on. But there's so many different things that could possibly happen. I think the tricky part about game knowledge now, and I know this is not a unique idea, others have already said it, but the game is so huge and we're getting new product at such a fast rate that it is impossible to keep up with 100% clarity. So really we just end up with doing the best we can, knowing the cards that we have seen. So I think one thing that I will say that I want to add to this part of the conversation is card and game knowledge are important. Knowing the rules, knowing that, especially the timing rules, understanding the timing rules well, knowing how your cards work. And we all make mistakes on this one. I'm just as guilty as anybody else of really confidently saying how something works and then being totally wrong about it.
That's the story of that's the
That,
story
yeah.
of my life.
I know I definitely have that unearned confidence, and sometimes it bites me. But what I think is really important is to ask questions in a game and to not be afraid to do that. I think unfortunately we do have a culture that really encourages people to kind of be know-it-alls, and we can curb that a little bit as a group and say, you know what, it's okay if somebody doesn't know how something works, and we don't have to drag them for it, and we can just let it be a learning situation for all of us, and to be kind to ourselves in those situations as well. But ask questions. If you don't understand how something is working, it's very valuable to ask somebody to explain it. So card knowledge, important, very, very useful, because it does allow you to preempt threats. So if you know combos that are happening, you can preempt that threat by, we'll talk more about those subtle things that people play that don't necessarily get the threat assessment that they deserve. But just as important to that is to ask questions when you see something come up that you don't know.
Right, and then another thing that's kind of important with this whole section is you don't know what are in people's hands or other hidden information. They might have the perfect answer in their deck that you just don't know what it is. And you can never know everything. So I notice this a lot when it doesn't happen in my videos, but I've seen where people oh well, why didn't you do this in this game? Because you don't have all the information when you're looking at a game and you're just looking at the 4 play mats and you don't know what's in other people's hands. Like it and it's just it's a totally different feeling than when you have stakes in the game as well too. So like just be kind to people. Let's just make it simple like that. Just be kind to people. Don't just because they didn't think of it doesn't mean that they're wrong, doesn't mean that you're right. It's a game.
And that speaks to the complexity again, right? Like there's so much going on at any given time. And I know that, we refer back to old games that we've played in the past, but I definitely again remember that game where the Wilhelm player came back and killed us all. But in that game, like everybody's engines were running so hot and we were all doing so many things. I completely lost the thread. I did some bananas things in that game that I would never have imagined. Like I had so much mana on board, I put all 12 counters on a midnight clock in one turn.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not
It
a
was
good
right
play.
after you almost got milled too. So it's it was just that perfect time. I have 3 cards left. Now I have all of them.
Now I have all of them. But really, like, there were so many other things so many other choices I could have made in that game. It really was I just did it for the meme, really.
Yeah.
Because I was so, and it's because the game is so complex, and there were obviously more optimal lines for me to take, but there was no way for me to see them. I was just so washed out at that point. And really, the game is super complicated. We're not going to see every line that is available to us, and you're absolutely right that being there in the moment, trying to absorb all the information, trying to play a 4-player game of complicated chess, it turns out takes a lot of energy, and sometimes we just don't have it. So before we move on, I do want to ask you this question. How much time do you think that you spend learning new cards, if
Interesting.
any?
So it's definitely a lot less than it used to be.
Yeah.
I used to look at the spoiler page every day just to see what every single card is. And, being a stay-at-home dad, taking care of 2 children, taking care of the house, working a part-time job, streaming, and doing all these other things that I've simply added on to my boatload of responsibilities. Now it's just ever since New Capenna, I'm just okay. I see a card, I'm like, that's a cool card. What set is that from? Oh wait, how long ago did that come out? I'm sorry. Like I don't have the opportunity to learn new cards, but when I see an interesting card, I try to remember it, or I'll take a note of it and say, "Oh, that's a cool card. I really should remember that one."
I think that speaks to kind of who you are as a player and what you do. You have lots of other interests, true about a lot of people, and really as a exclusively a commander player, you just can't possibly keep up with all the sets, and you're probably never going to see 75, 80, 90% of those cards because they're not really commander card. They're never going to be meaningful in commander, and it's impossible to kind of like distill a set down to these are the cards you'll probably see in commander. I mean, I guess that you could go and watch the other content creators talk about here are the cards that you may see in commander from this set. Note here that that could be a good idea for us to do. To just
Maybe someday.
maybe someday cherry pick a list from new sets that say these are the
Yeah.
cards that are interesting to us. But anyway, I think that I probably I also do far less than I used to, and I am somebody who keeps up with standards. So even that, though, I have stopped doing nearly as much. I used to, in spoiler season, go through and not memorize every card, but really get a good read on every single card in a set. And I have not been doing it in the past year or so. I do learn the cards through playing the game, like through getting in and doing drafts and doing sealed and then eventually playing standard. But really, I don't. I do look, but I'll tell you what I do is I do when new sets come out, I look at the legendary creatures.
Yeah.
I look at what other new commanders might be available, and is that something that I would want to build around? That's about the only thing that I'm
Yeah,
really
that makes a lot of sense.
It's the only thing I'm really deliberately spending time doing.
Yeah, so I think now is a good time to start buckling down and start talking about actual cards that are must deal with commanders. So I will start off. The first must deal with commander is Narset Enlightened Master. She is a 6 mana uh, Jeskai human monk. She's a 3/2 first strike and hexproof. When Narset Enlightened Master attacks, exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until end of turn, you may cast non-creature cards exiled with Narset this turn without paying their mana cost. One of the main reasons why this is a huge threat to deal with is people link extra combat and extra turn spells with her. So like if she gets haste and attacks on that turn, you might not have a turn for another 6 turns, and she's going to have 26 more combats.
I mean, it's definitely on the list of like this is one of the arch enemies of old, right? But it reminds us of that really important lesson that casting spells for free is just
Turns out it's really good.
so strong, and this was one of those very early examples of being able to cast extra turn spells for free and continue to do the thing over and over makes for a very, very powerful situation for that player.
So what are one of the commander must deal commanders that you have?
First on my list is Krenko Mob Boss. This is 2 and 2 red for a 3/3 Goblin Warrior. You can tap it to create X 1/1 red Goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you already control. So this is a bit of a bias for me, I guess, in that whenever I have played against this commander, that person is playing Goblin combo, and that Goblin combo deck is incredibly consistent and incredibly fast. And if you do not deal with it immediately, everybody at the table will lose. And I think that it is very strong as a commander deck, no question. So when I see this commander, it is a clue to me that they are very likely playing that combo deck. So this is a moment where when I see this commander, I'm gonna look at that player and put them high on my threat list for the entire game. I'm gonna pay very close attention to everything that they do, and I'm going to do my very best to interrupt the combo. And part of that is getting rid of this commander.
So the funny thing about every time that I've seen Krenko Mob Boss, It has always been turn 1 Soul Ring, turn 2 Cranko, turn 3 6 goblins, turn 4 24 goblins, turn 5 1 billion goblins, and it's just like, god damn, like it, like for me it's not even fun to play against because it's just like, congratulations, you had fast mana.
It's so fast.
So fast. So my next commander that I run on a personal level is Zur the Enchanter. He is a 4 mana Esper commander. He is a legendary creature human wizard with he's a 1/4 flyer. And whenever Zur the Enchanter attacks, you may search your library for an enchantment card with mana value 3 or less and put it into the battlefield. Then shuffle your library. So my personal deck for Zur the Enchanter isn't the crazy, oh, I'm going to play Necropotence and then just draw everything that I need and win that turn. Mine is a cycling deck, and it's still stupid. Like, it's usually turn 2 ramp, turn 3 Zur, turn 4 Astral Slide. None of your creatures matter anymore.
It's so powerful that even when you give people the speech about how your Zur deck is different, you still get put at the top of the threat list from moment one in that game. And I haven't even seen you play this deck in a minute, but man,
I don't play it
people
very
are
often.
yeah, because people are terrified of it, and with good reason, because they don't, even if you say in the Rule Zero conversation, oh yeah, oh my deck is the is this version of this deck. There are a couple of commanders that even when you say that, the people are
Still
still going to
don't
be like,
trust you.
doesn't I still don't trust you. I've been burned too many times in the past, and I can't put my heart out there again. So I understand why that one's on the list for sure.
Yeah.
So
Which one? Yeah.
next one for me is Chatterfang Squirrel General. This is 2 and a green for a 3/3 Squirrel Warrior. Has Forest Walk. It reads, if one or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus that many 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens are created instead. You can also pay a black, sacrifice X squirrels, and target creature gets plus X minus X until end of turn. So if you are unfamiliar, Chatterfang is also the kind of center of a lot of really easy to put together infinite combos. That is why this commander to me is up top of the list, that if I see this commander at the table, I'm going to pay attention to that player because I know that they're very likely playing the infinite combos in their deck. Then they're going to involve their commander. So being able to interact with it in some way means I have to kind of leave mana open or be ready to move at a moment's notice to deal with what they're doing. Most of them are kind of aristocrat style, sacrifice and deal damage combos, just going very wide with tokens. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but all of that to say this is another combo based commander. It's also cheap. It's fairly true about Cranko. 4 is not super high for a commander, but Chatterfang only costs 3. You can assemble again, Soul Ring on 1 means Chatterfang's out on 2 with another thing if you're lucky, and then they could very easily win on turn 3 with this commander. So to me, it's one that I pay a lot of attention to when I see it.
I mean, that just also works really well with Jeweled Lotus too. It's like, oh, I'm gonna do everything now. But
Oh
I'm
man, you're so right.
uh
Jesus.
I'm just starting to think you hate token decks. I think you've been burned in the past, Tim.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm
Yeah.
getting here?
Yeah, the goblin one is actually I Chatterfang. I built that deck at some point, and
Yeah.
and really, we've talked a lot about this. That like I'm not really here to deliberately race to an infinite combo. That's not the kind of games that I want to play. So I built it and was like, this is fine, but
It's
I'm
also
not.
just too easy to get to them. Like, you don't.
It
There's
it
just
it
so
is.
many pieces that work together. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's not like it's one specific card. It's
Right.
one of 20 cards.
Right.
So I'm starting to think I have been burned in the past. One of my other is Urza Lord High Artificer. He is a 4 mana human artificer. When he's a 1/4 as well. When Urza, Lord Artificer, enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with it gets +1/+1 for each artifact creature for each artifact you control. He also has tap an untapped artifact you control, add a blue, and I know because word salad.
Yeah.
Pay 5, shuffle your library, exile the top card of your exile the top card. Until end of turn, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So I've apparently been burned with people playing for free. I mean, stuff for free. uh,
It's true. There's a theme here as well.
yeah, I've been burned with people playing stuff for free. He just like every single line of his text just builds towards like what he does, and it's just too much, man. It's scary. Like if I were to build this thing, it would be just Urza Cheerios. Like I would want to make a cereal box art for Urza, and it would just be nothing but Cheerios. And then I play it, and then I just start, and then of course it would have tentacle monsters in it because why the heck not?
Because why not? You're casting gigantic things for free accidentally. So
Accidentally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he is a must kill on site, no matter.
I think most people would agree with that one.
Yeah.
Like we all understand that one in the command zone, and I play a copy of that in one of my decks. It's not the commander though, so I try to sneak it in there as a result. Although I don't think I've actually.
I haven't seen it yet.
I don't think I've played it yet. I think I might have gotten it in one game, but I'm not really sure about that. So the last one on my list is a little bit newer than the rest of them. It's a little more than a year now. Anyway, it's Joda the Unifier.
Mm-hmm.
This is our newest Joda released in Dominaria United. So Wooburg for the cost, one of each color. It's a 5/5 human wizard. So a 5/5 for 5 is nothing to forget about. Just from the beginning. Legendary creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of other legendary creatures you control, and then whenever you cast a legendary spell from your hand, exile cards from the top of your library till you exile a legendary non-land card with lesser mana value. You may cast that card without playing its cost. Rest on the bottom in random order. So Cascade for legendary spells, on top of being a gigantic anthem if you are playing nothing but legendary creatures, and even if you're not playing nothing, just a couple of legendary creatures in this guy is gigantic. And again, this is just I think that it makes the list. I won't say that I've been burned, but I have been killed by this commander before.
Mm-hmm.
I have definitely been beaten by this deck, and I don't necessarily think that it's overpowered by any stretch.
I think this is the fairest one on the list, but he's still very scary.
Right, and
I mean, your last pick is very similar to my last pick, which actually is the first Sliver, which is a Wooburg commander, has Cascade, and then Sliver spells you have Cascade. So basically, it's the same thing that his commander does, but for just slivers.
Right.
Without the anthem.
I didn't realize that when I picked it, but it is very similar. And here again we have commanders that allow you to kind of get value for free, that allow you to cast spells for free. Those are going to be pretty high up on the list of threats. If we kind of look at the rest of our list here, we've also got things that are combo pieces, like Urza makes kind of both lists. Arguably, that it is a combo piece and also something that allows you to play spells for free. So these are things to consider when we're talking about commanders.
So these are some of the must deal with cards in the 99. So the first card I have is Aetherflux Reservoir. It's a 4-mana artifact. Whenever you cast a spell, gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn, and then you can pay 50 life to deal 50 damage to any target. So turns out when your life total starts at 40, you only have to cast a couple of spells to get to 50, and you nuke somebody. And then see this card, get rid of it immediately. There's no redeeming quality of leaving this card around.
Yeah, Aetherflux Reservoir, absolute must destroy. I've lost to this card so many times. Don't undersell it. Don't go, they don't have the life yet. I'm not going to worry about it.
There's no time.
Don't do it. Don't fall for it. Get rid of Aetherflux Reservoir with prejudice.
All right. So what kind of cards do you have on your list?
So I'll start with Rooftop Storm. We talked about this earlier. So Rooftop Storm is an enchantment, 5 and a blue. It's just a regular enchantment. You may pay 0 rather than pay mana cost for zombie creature spells. So what's remarkable is that from a financial standpoint, this card is still incredibly cheap, but it really, in any kind of deck that is looking to combo off with zombies, it fits right in. It makes for a lot of different infinite combos. And really, again, even if you're just playing a fair zombie deck where you're trying to flood the board, free spells multiple times. It doesn't just say can only be used once a turn. You can dump your whole hand. That's fine. So this is, I think, an incredibly powerful enchantment that needs to be dealt with immediately.
So 100% agree with that. So my next card is Bolus's Citadel. We know it, we love it, and we hate it. Okay. It's a 6 mana artifact. It's 3 and 3 black. It's a legendary artifact. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play the top card of your library if you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to the converted mana cost rather than pay its mana cost. And then you can also tap, sacrifice 10 permanents. Each opponent loses 10 life. I very rarely see the bottom part of the ability be used.
Right.
It has happened in the past. I'm not saying it doesn't. But really, the main important thing is you're paying spells for free. Turns out when your life total's 40, you're going to use it as a resource, and that's a lot of mana to get for free. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah.
So don't give them the opportunity castings.
Looking at it as a resource is a great way to kind of frame this card, right? Like we say your life total is a resource, but like the amount of value that you get out of this from just one kind of good sequence of cards puts you so far ahead that it is very hard for other people to deal with. And a lot of decks that play this are gaining life. So they're trying to get their life total up before they would see this card so that by the time they get it, it's actually not impacting them in the same way. So huge difficult thing to deal with. So for my next card, I have to start by reading the quote. So it is, unskin these impure bodies, great Yawgmoth, that the flesh may welcome your blessings. Gross.
Good.
It's Phyrexian Altar. It's 3 mana artifact, sacrifice a creature, add 1 mana of any color. It is a combo piece. It's also just really objectively good in a deck that's playing a lot of tokens, is able to kind of sacrifice those tokens for any color of mana. I know a lot of people would argue that Ashnod's Altar belongs in this spot as well and is arguably better in a lot of situations because you get more mana. But Phyrexian Altar in particular combos with cards like Gravecrawler for infinite combos that are very low to the ground in terms of mana value, very easy to pull off. If somebody has a Phyrexian Altar, trust and believe that it is a part of a combo, and you should really, if you have artifact destruction, this should be on your list of things to hit.
One thing I will mention that's if you Cross and Grip it, they can still sacrifice creatures because it is a mana ability. So if you Cross and Grip it, they're just going to do what they want to do anyway. So that's what also makes this combo more dangerous, because they can just sack everything they want to sack before it goes away, and then they have all the mana of the thing. So the next card on my list is Consecrated Sphinx. Love this card. I wish I had more of them. It is a 6 mana blue Sphinx. It's a 4/6 flyer, and whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. So 1 turn cycle of a normal turn, you're getting 6 additional cards for 6 mana. Turns out that's a pretty good deal for your mana. And let's be real, we're in Commander. People are drawing cards in Commander. So you're going to draw a lot.
I think you're going to see a similar thing happen with the new 2 mana fairy creature that was made by the world champion last year. It just draws you an extra card whenever a player draws their second card. But it's way less casting cost. So you're going to see this in Commander in the near future. It's going to do a very similar thing, not quite to the exaggerated way that Consecrated Sphinx does it, but this is one of those things where Consecrated Sphinx gets that gigantic card draw, explosive card draw advantage. And I'm surprised how often people see Consecrated Sphinx and don't immediately kill it with fire. So this is definitely on my radar. It should be on yours. Definitely a must deal with threat.
All right, what's your
Next,
yep?
next for me is Hermit Druid. And this one is 1 and a green. It's a 1/1 human druid. You pay a green and tap it. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a basic land card. Put that card into your hand. All other cards revealed this way into your graveyard. So if you've been playing long enough, you know what this card is about. One activation in a commander deck where you're not playing a lot of basic lands means you're going to dump a bunch of cards into your graveyard. That is what it's there for. It really does not want to, it does not care about grabbing the land, although that's nice. You get to actually put the land into your hand, so you're basically drawing a card. But what it's there for is dumping cards into your graveyard, which it does better than almost any
I
card
was
in
about
the
to
game.
say in those decks, it's really drawing like 60 cards. Unless if you're Jimmy Wong, your top card's going to be a basic land.
Right. And we've saw just again recently that this card made a reappearance on that show, and it did much better that time, and that's how it usually operates. So
Yep.
this is definitely on the list of something that you see, it is actually in that deck going to draw them 20 to 30 to 40 cards, not just one. So you need to look at this as an incredibly explosive card draw engine and treat it accordingly.
So the last like kind of idea that's on my list, it's not any specific card. Any card that says double on it is absolutely terrifying. So like cards that I'm thinking of are like doubling season, where you're doubling the amount of tokens or permanent or tokens or counters on anything. Pretty disgusting. We got doubling cube that doubles your mana, which is also disgusting. We got mana reflections that are doubling. Anything that doubles anything is terrifying and should absolutely be destroyed. Panharmonicon is another perfect instance of that, where it's
I
like,
mean, if you've been holding that destroy spell this whole game, waiting for the right target, this is where the question of threat assessment really comes in, right? So Panharmonicon hits the battlefield, and you think to yourself, they don't have any mana right now to follow it up. I can wait. Don't.
wrong.
Don't let them get any value out of it, because if they get any value out of it, they get so far ahead that you've already missed your opportunity. Just know that the incredible amount of resource benefit they get from doubling an effect just once really earns that removal spell. Definitely a place to point that spell if you've been holding on to it for a minute.
Even with that, like, so just removing that before they do anything with it, that means they spent 4 mana to put a card into their graveyard, where you let them draw 4 cards and search for 6 lands. They've gotten their mana value out of it tenfold, where, like, again, don't give them the opportunity to actually use that particular asset. And a lot of those things that double it, there's a higher mana cost up front, so it's easier to get rid of it before they use it.
Yeah. Beans wants me to shut up. She just started biting my headphones.
Oh no.
Okay, last topic for today, right? Wait, hold on.
So there's two parts of this last topic,
Yep.
but it's the last topic, and that's how can you not be a threat while playing? So I'll start off here with start sandbagging your soul rings and your instant speed removal, and like other like really fast ramp spells. If you're gonna play a soul ring on turn 1, people always will say he's the threat. But if you wait until turn, like, especially if you're not going to use all that mana right away, like, there's been times where I have an opening soul ring in my hand, I don't play it until turn 4, and then people are like, oh, soul ring on turn 4, perfect timing. Like, yeah, because that's when I chose to play it, because I need that mana next turn, or I just need that extra oomph this turn, and it works out really well. People don't care when you play a Soul Ring on turn 4. People care when you play on turn 1.
It's true. The both you and I have done this.
We did it in the
Sometimes
same game. Like, it was
Yeah,
great.
sometimes deliberately, sometimes not. But I think we both did it deliberately once in the same game where we were like, "I'm not gonna play my slow ring on
We
one. I'm
don't
gonna
get to.
wait till 3." Still very impactful on turn 3, but doesn't feel the same for everybody. I think that this is a good trick.
So, what's another way of avoiding being the threat?
I think that, like, in terms of play pattern, what comes up for me is I I'm a pretty big proponent of paying attention to the way that you actually play the game, the way that you communicate with other people, the way that you kind of explain the how things are going. So I think that clear communication can actually be a pretty fantastic way of doing this, of
I never
making
really thought
sure
of that. Yeah.
that when you're talking to people, like, I mean, in fairness, I'm somebody who works in a very forward facing industry, and I am pretty skillful at communicating with other people, and I'm actually fairly skillful at making myself seem really friendly. So there is a benefit to doing that you don't necessarily want to kind of actually draw, to draw that fire off from everybody. But in actual play pattern stuff, that translates to kind of being clear about why you're doing the things that you are doing. I know that you are also not a fan. I agree with this. Not a fan of, like, kind of making the attack random or not taking responsibility for the thing that you are doing. But I really kind of will explain my attack to somebody, like, I'm going to attack you because this is, because I think that your commander is the scariest. I'm gonna give a reason that I am doing the things that I am doing, and I think that that can cut down on the feeling of, like, I think that that can cut down on the saltiness of the play, which can sometimes get you the threat.
So, my one of the ways that I like to not become the threat is, let's say if there is a big scary creature on the board, don't kill it immediately. Wait to see who it attacks. Let it go somewhere else. Like, because if you kill his big scary creature, he's gonna be mad at you. I mean, he has every right to be. So he's gonna want to be mean back. So if you let it attack someone else, either he's gonna answer it and then you save your answer, or it just deals damage to him, and then that's one less. Now he's angry at him. So, like, it's just taking that back seat and say, "Oh, he did it," is a very good way of becoming not the threat. And one last thing that I could think of being not becoming not the threat. Wait until someone plays something big and scary and just sneak that in right behind it. It's one of my favorite things to do. Is, what? Did you just play a really, really big creature? Well, I'm gonna draw 12 cards. Shh.
You said something earlier that I didn't realize that it fit in this category, but I really think it does. So when you're talking about Sisay Weatherlight Captain, and that you'll play it really early on at a time where you can't utilize it immediately, which
Mm-hmm.
in some circumstances could be considered a risky play. But I think that in the Commander format, that it is actually a little bit safer, because people are doing that threat assessment based on, is this going to come at me now?
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to cause problems for me right now, or can I wait and deal with it later? So when assembling combo pieces or when assembling an engine, consider sequencing things in such a way where the less threatening thing hits the board first.
I do
So
this with my door deck all the time, where it's like, oh, I'll play
right,
Amulet of Vigor first. Oh, that just
right.
untaps things. Oh, I'll play Taunos. Oh, that's great. I play door.
There it is. It's very good. So, I mean, so grave crawler and Phyrexian altar, right? Like, we identified Phyrexian altar as a really high level threat in this conversation. Grave crawler is the other piece of that combo. Another zombie makes it go infinite. So having playing the grave crawler first earlier in the game doesn't necessarily draw the same hate. So
And it doesn't
sequence.
matter if it's in the graveyard as long as you have another zombie.
Sequencing it is very important when it comes to this stuff. So when assembling pieces, very much consider setting yourself up first, putting the less threatening pieces on board before you go full throttle and play the thing. I remember actually I was listening to another podcast talking about this, but Brutaclad Telcore Engineer comes to mind, where it's like I'm not playing Brutaclad for a small amount of advantage over time. If I'm playing that card, the game's about to end.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna play this card, and it's going to be the game ending thing that it should be. So it's something to think about. You can't be considered a threat if your threat doesn't come out until you're actually about to win.
All right, and the last thing that I had in mind for the how to not be a threat: don't draw 12 cards at once. Make it incremental card draw over turns. Like, no one's going to care about your Phyrexian Arena, but they are going to care about your Brain Geyser for 26.
I understand why you put this on the list. I don't know that I entirely agree, just because I've seen you do it so many times and still not be perceived as the threat. Like he's
I
got
don't know how I get away with it
it,
so much.
it's not just you though. Card draw, generally speaking, does not draw the amount of hate that I think that it should. So like in this case, I think that you can pay attention to that and drawing cards at like the right time, and kind of thinking about what cards you're going to include as your card draw, to influence how other people are going to perceive you, which segues us into the very final thing we're going to talk about today, which is how can you decrease your perceived threat level while deck building. And we've talked about this in our previous podcasts and previous conversations about, especially in the Rule Zero podcast, where we talked about, how, what is a part of that conversation, and how do you make a play state for everybody that is fun and enjoyable and they want to keep coming back. So your deck building, if you're taking the people that you play with into consideration, you can make choices that are also going to affect the level of threat that you are perceived to be. So I will start this one off by saying that this is something that I have worked on a lot lately, and it is cutting down on the number of tutors and cutting down on the number of infinite combos in a deck. Infinite combos is a divisive topic. Some people are totally okay with it. It is part of the game, something you need to be able to contend with. If you're playing instant speed interaction, you should be able to deal with an infinite combo if it comes up. So, whatever your opinion of it may be, being attentive to how many of them you're putting into your deck and how quickly your deck is getting to them is something that you can definitely think about, especially if your commander, like Krenko or like Chatterfang, is part of an infinite combo. You can definitely pay attention to that and take that in consideration. And then the tutor thing, people, when you're playing the really expensive, and by that I mean dollar, the really
Cha-ching.
like financially expensive tutors, you are going to be perceived as a threat, because it is something else that puts people on people's radars, is playing financially expensive
Just hearing the word
spells.
demonic tutor just sends shivers down my spine.
Right, Vampire Tutor is right up there as well. Most of the expensive ones are Enlightened Tutor, Mystical Tutor. All of them kind of fill the same category for me, where it's like this really is an incredibly financially expensive card, and people see it, and they like. There's something that happens, I think, when people are seeing that that's the kind of thing that they are playing against. That you may very well be up in your aggro meter just by playing those tutors. So think about the lesson here, folks: play more card draw, play less tutors.
Yes. So these two kind of go hand in hand. They're two sides of the same coin, right? So the first one is avoid stacks pieces. They're just feel bads. The last time I played a stacks deck, he just became public enemy number one because we wanted to play Magic, and he was like, nah. And the other side of that coin is to use cards that also kind of help your opponents out. But don't go full blown hugs. That's just too much. But like, there's like the white card draw spell that like you draw 3 cards and target opponent draws 3 cards. I can't think of the name of it right now, but you just made a friend for life. And use that to your advantage. Like, you won't be a threat to your friend that you just gave 3 cards. And the best part is you get to choose who gets it. So you can choose the guy that's down and out, or you can say, hey, he's the threat. We need your help to answer this threat. So I'm going to give you 3 cards to find the answer.
Yeah.
So just being able to do things like that also helps avoid the threat mitigation as well.
And so, like, another way of looking at that same situation is make allies, right? Like, this is a way to, like, you are not going to be the same kind of threat to somebody who you have made something of an alliance with. And you can make allies with your words, but you can really make allies with your actions.
Yeah, with
So
your spells.
the card that you're talking about is very, very crucial. One that pops to mind for me immediately is Ingenious Mastery. If you remember at MagicCon when we were playing against that Kinnan deck, that guy played Ingenious Mastery really early on, and it has a lot of text on it, but I'll skip to the important part. Since it's a mastery spell from Strixhaven, it's got an alternate cost. And if you pay the alternate cost, it does something slightly different, right? So if you pay the alternate cost of that spell, which is 2 and a blue, you draw 3 cards, and target opponent creates 2 treasure tokens and scries 2. So the Wilhelm player was behind on mana, and our buddy with the Kinnan deck played Ingenious Mastery and gave him 2 treasures. Remember, that's the guy who ends up coming back and winning. But that what's remarkable is he made an ally with that spell by giving the. I think that it's a good example of a probably underrated spell, but pretty terrific that he used it in that way to kind of make a friend early on.
Another way to kind of, like, this is in the playing category, but like, just remove someone else's threat even if it's not a threat for you. Like, hey, I will get rid of your threat for you, but you have to take this person out, or do my bidding.
That's fantastic. We've come full circle because you finally answered that question. Would you do it? And the answer, I know that the answer is that you would.
Oh, of course.
In a lot of situations, if you have the power to remove the thing, and I think what factors into that decision is it really going to set you back all that much to do it? If it's not going to use up an extraordinary amount of resources, you will probably swoop in and do the thing. Just because it will kind of get you that favor later on. It will have that person looking less at you and more at that other person. That can be very valuable. So use your actions to make allies is one way to cut down on that threat. So I think that brings us to the end of our regularly scheduled programming. So, friends, we are ready to scoop things up for today. Thank you kindly for spending time with us on the AZA Commander podcast. I'd like to remind you again that you can support this show and all of our other content by tuning into wherever you get your podcasts and by watching this and other videos on the YouTube page. And check us out on our streams on Twitch. You can find those links in the description.
So our question to the zombie horde is, what are your thoughts on threat assessments, and how do you make your decisions by other with threats? And have a wonderful day. See ya.